Välkomna till dagens stora event. Ni befinner er just nu vid Seriefrämmandets seriescen. Mitt namn är Fredrik Strömberg, jag är ordförande för Seriefrämmandet som har sett till att vi har denna eminenta scen på Bokmässan. För naturligtvis behöver konstformen tecknade serier en egen scen här. Vi kommer nu ha en intervju, en diskussion, och den diskussionen kommer att vara på engelska eftersom vår gäst, som ni alla vet, kommer från USA. Så från och nu så går jag över till engelska och jag hoppas att ni som är lite mindre har någon som kan hjälpa till lite grann och berätta vad vi pratar om. All right, that was it. I just used my prerogative to talk a bit in Swedish and say some bad things about you. I'm sorry about that. Right. So, no, I'm sure everyone would have been booing and hissing if I did that. Everyone, we got the most famous Donald Duck artist in the world here right now, so give him a big hand of applause.
No.
There you go. I must ask you, I mean, we've been doing this a couple of times now on various stages around the world.
My ears always turn red, though, don't they?
Oh, well. How does that feel? Do you feel... When you go to Europe and people treat you almost like a rock star, how does that feel?
You must notice I already have trouble looking up at the at the people.
You can look at me, that's all right.
All right.
but I mean,
all right. Well, how does it feel? It's
yeah.
It's usually feel like I'm impersonating somebody.
Yeah.
Or it's like these entire countries, especially Finland. It's a gigantic practical joke on me. Let's make him think he's famous in it.
Oh, well, we can pretend it's a practical joke. That's all right.
All right.
Oh. But I mean, I remember running into you in San Diego, the biggest comic convention in America, and you were walking around rather unmolested there.
Yeah, it's fine there. I can just walk around and buy old comic books, and the only people who pay attention to me are the comic dealers. Because here comes Don Rosa. He's going to buy some old comics.
But doesn't that feel weird to be that famous in Europe and not famous in your own home country?
Well, yes. It's like I say, I'm not kidding. It's like I'm impersonating somebody when I'm here, but it's that appreciation that kept me going for an extra 15 or 20 years in this often rather frustrating job, and that's where I got my energy. Doing a book fair like this or a comic convention in Europe would give me the energy to go on one more year, and so I'm just kind of tired right now. I've been going so hard. I'm not used to all the activity, so I was just telling Fredrik that we're up late last night, and I went to bed and then got up and came right over here. So. But go ahead.
We'll take another picture. Go ahead. I mean, looking at the way people treat you and the popularity of your comics. I mean, right now you're getting the treatments of having a big Don Rosa library.
Oh yes.
And you're the second duck artist to get that treatment. So, I mean, you're not impersonating. Your comics are actually popular. But does that make you feel uncomfortable, or does that make you feel pompous, or?
It's only uncomfortable because I don't think I can live up to it. I think the reason I enjoy coming to Europe is, well, for decades these comics have been so popular all over Europe and South America and other places, but the readers have never had an opportunity to show the appreciation to any writers or artists because they're always in third world countries. They're in Chile or southern Italy or something, and I seem to have been the first person who was actually loved the work so much, and I could speak English. If they had somebody up from Chile, they'd speak Spanish, or from Italy, but people here in Scandinavia can speak such excellent English. Like I've always told you, they speak better English with a bigger vocabulary and better pronunciation than my neighbors in Kentucky. I always tell a story when talking to the editors in Norway or Denmark. After I used to have a conversation with them on the telephone, I'd have to get out an English dictionary and look up a couple of the words they use. But well, it seemed to me as much of a fan as I was of Karl Barks and these comics, the way people all over Europe were and are. It seemed like a sacred duty, if that sounds corny, but that's actually how it felt, that it was a sacred duty that I represent all these other writers and artists, because I could tell that people were so passionately wanting to talk to somebody who wrote these comics. Karl Barks, of course, was too old to travel, and as I said, the other people, even if they could travel, maybe they weren't that interested in talking to the fans because it was just a job to them. And to me, it was just like something I'd wanted to do since childhood, and the publishers knew I loved to talk about it. I loved to talk to fans because I did it for 25 years, but I still only felt like a fan who somebody was letting write and draw the comic books for a few days. And I still felt like that. Doing that book series you mentioned, I had to write sort of an autobiography of everything I'd done as far as comics go, and I realized it even more, that everything I'd done, even professionally, it was only because I was a fan. I was never proud of anything that I wanted. I never tried to create anything. I tried to just pay homage to the comics that I grew up with. I like to do sequels to old stories, and I wasn't interested in creating anything. So it was a fan project my whole career, and I think that's why the readers seem to inexplicably like it so much. My artwork to me looks pretty like an underground art with all that other beautiful Disney artwork in the Egmont comics. And like I've said in other interviews, I think that the readers look at that and think, for somebody to obviously put so much work into such bad art, he must be enjoying himself. and they enjoy themselves too. Looking at they can tell I'm putting a lot more effort into it than the pay probably indicates. I'm just doing it. I'm doing it for fun. I'm not trying to please an editor, and I'm not trying to please an art director. I'm just trying to please fans. Well, and please myself, I guess.
Well, I mean, your art does stick out when you compare to other Disney artists, yeah. But I don't think that's in a bad way. That makes your comics noticeable all the time, whenever they're published anywhere.
Yeah, they're noticeable.
But what I like about meeting up with you is that you're 100% for your fans all the time. Do you remember last year when we did a talk in a big room somewhere else in the book fair?
Yeah.
And afterwards, when we do these things, I usually see it as my job to make sure that people don't pester you and want you to draw stuff, because you want them to be in the line and you want it to be fair for everyone.
Oh, well, yeah. That's I tell people a lot that here or in Finland or in Germany, where I'm going to be touring for the next 2 weeks, sometimes I'll sit for 10 or 11 hours nonstop and draw for fans or sign. And people tell me or ask me, don't I get tired? And they were asking me if I got tired yesterday after only like an hour and a half. And I said, well, I haven't even started yet. I'm just getting warmed up. But I never get tired. And I can't explain it. But it's, I think, the energy from the fans. I mean, I just can't believe that other comic fans are paying this much attention and being so appreciative of what I do. So I just never get tired of it. After about 10 hours, I start to get really stupid. My brain gets tired. I think the adrenaline apparently only affects physical, but it doesn't seem to help your brain any. But that's the reason I'm here. So.
Yeah. Right now, there's an image of the Donald Duck magazine that you edited.
Oh, that I edited, yeah.
Well, actually, it said that you edited.
Yeah.
No, do you remember doing that?
Yes.
Yeah. Was that fun? Was that troublesome? Was that interesting?
Well, I always tell the editors that I never want to have their job. It's easy to write and draw the stories, but to be an editor, you have to somehow figure out what the readers want, and worse than that, you have to think not just what they want now. You have to think about what they want a year from now or 5 years from now. So that's too much work, or that's too scary. But editing an issue, I didn't too much like the idea, but they could narrow it down for me a little bit. Because some stories had just been used recently. I was picking out the Bark story. I couldn't pick out the rest of the issue because I don't know anything about all the other European comics. I mean, when I travel in Europe, I see all the beautiful artists. I see the artwork, but I can't read the story. So I said I couldn't pick from them, but I could help them pick out the Barks reprints. And I think the one job was to choose a backup feature. Well, the Scrooge stories are always the second feature in the Donald Duck Weekly. And they showed me a list of, it was a long list, but that narrowed it down a little bit. And one of the comics, one of the stories on the list was an Uncle Scrooge backup story. You know, in America, we had the long Uncle Scrooge story by Karl Barks, and then in the back there was a shorter Uncle Scrooge story. And one of the comics on the list was my very favorite, like, backup Uncle Scrooge story. So that was perfect. I said I could, that would be my selection for the best ever short Uncle Scrooge story. And I think that's the one that was in the issue. It was about him prospecting in Australia to show his nephews how he could find riches anywhere. Riches everywhere, I think was the name of it. And artists. They didn't want to be editors either. They wanted, but that's the best they could do. So.
That's harsh.
I'm not trying to be harsh. I mean, I'd probably more qualified to be an editor than a cartoonist myself.
No, I don't think so.
The art directors thought so, but that's, you know, they're dedicated people. They wish, you know, they could do more of the creative part of it, I guess.
Now I've got some images from one of your comics, and I'm not sure how much you're aware of this, but in Sweden right now there's a lot of talk about education and the joy of reading, or rather the lack thereof from a younger generation. And I thought your comics would be just perfect as a discussion starter for that, because your comics obviously generate a lot of attention and joy of reading.
Well,
and you do cram your comics full of facts, scientific and historical. And I don't think a lot of people who are not young anymore understand that or remember that. And could you say a bit why you do that? Because your comics are in that way different from many other Disney comics.
Well, you know, and as I said, I'm doing Donald Duck comics not the way that an editor would want me to do it. I just do it the way that I do a story that I'd like to read. Now, Karl Barks instilled in me and many people that the love for stories based in history. You know, his stories always had an authentic feel to them and had authentic backgrounds and settings. So he instilled in me a love for historical fiction that may have been gone even beyond the comic book level. So when I used to write a story based on a treasure hunt or some aspect of history, I would base it totally in real history, and I'd go overboard in that respect. But it seemed like more of a challenge to create a hopefully entertaining story and only use actual facts. I think I burdened myself too much with that towards the end. But you mentioned that one of the topics in the news now is educational comics used in education, and I told you that I was never trying to educate anybody. That was by accident. I was just trying to entertain them in a way that I'd want to be entertained, and I enjoyed historical fiction.
Well, I think that's why it works, because if you try to educate people, then the comics turn into boring stuff. Yeah. So.
And as far as the boring aspect of it is, in other interviews I've said, even though it sounds corny, that history that we learn in school is by necessity. When you start out teaching history, you're stuck with dates and specific events and dates, and it's by definition it's boring. But when you start doing research into history, it's fascinating. It's like movie. It's better than movies. It's intrigue and war and drama, and and I would find the most interesting things that I'd never imagined people hadn't made movies of, and I just kind of link them together. They'd be authentic. I would only make a fictitious link between these facts, and it would make a really interesting story. I'd come across things that I just couldn't believe a screenwriter had never discovered and done a movie about. But I guess they won't now, because the things in history involve very few explosions and car chases. So they'd make a very boring American movie in these days. So, but no, I really enjoyed doing stories based in history. And another aspect maybe is that when I'm doing a story that I really enjoyed working on, maybe that comes through to the readers. That's why they seem to like. Not that all the readers like those stories, but you know, the comics have something for everybody. Some readers like my stories. Some readers like the other type stories.
Well, I gave a talk yesterday about comics in school, And I started like you always do when you talk about that subject in the 50s and Vertum and people like that making comics look bad in the 50s and the 60s. Now you're old enough to remember this.
Oh yeah.
How was that in America? Well, we got repercussions of this in Sweden. We had a big discussion in Sweden as well, but it sort of originated in America.
Well, yeah, I remember when I was in grade school, the teachers would never condone reading comic books, and they would give us in the 3rd or 4th grade classic literature to read, which is stupid. I mean, a kid's not going to enjoy that. The kid has to first learn that it's fun to read, that it's entertaining, that they get something pleasant out of it. So they should be started on comic books, or started on books with a lot of, in early grade school, books with lots of pictures, because and they have to learn to enjoy reading, and then they can progress themselves up to the classics later. But I just can't imagine there was a period when teachers condemned reading comic books. That's stupid. It's so there's lots of very nice what they call in America graphic novels. It's a little bit too fancy a term for comic book albums, but they can. That's what they should be. Are they using that sort of thing now more in European?
Some, but not as much as in America. No, but there are equivalents.
In America, they use comic books in schools. I hadn't heard of that. No, I didn't think so.
Not really. Would you be comfortable with your comics being taught in school? Would that feel awkward?
I'd never thought of that. That's it's in America. The kids see so few comic books. I mean, it's a topic for a whole other discussion. The way Europeans think comic books are popular in America, because they just see so much stuff about superhero movies and superhero TV shows and toys. But very few people in America read comics. They just the nerds and the who go to the comic book shops. But in the rest of America, you never see comic books. So I would be surprised that teachers in America are even thinking about comic books, because they never see them. And what they do see is negative, the violent movies. So yeah, I could now that you mention it, I could see a swing back to teachers thinking, if they did make comic books of this kind of stuff, we wouldn't want kids reading them.
Well, I've got it, the first page of let's see now, Universal Solvent, right? Yeah. Could you say something about that? This is one of my favorite of your stories.
That was based on a story I did for the started doing for the college newspaper back in the early 1970s. Because I was, as you know, I never had any art training like I think that people can see in the comics. My only training's in civil engineering, and so I used to like basing stories on a little bit of actual science, and that was, in the original version of this. This is where Gyro creates a solvent that can melt anything. My original version, if you wanted to know that, was my character had captured a black hole from outer space. It was a very tiny one. And they somehow created a solvent that acted like a black hole. But the rest of the story was pretty similar. It ate a hole to the center of the earth.
But why did you change that from the first version?
Well, maybe well, in the first version, I had like 60 or 70 pages. This time I had like 20.
Yeah,
so
right.
As it was, my stories are like 40-page stories crammed into 20 pages, and that would have been like a 70 or 80-page story crammed into 20. So I had to leave out the black hole stuff. But
it seems that
the problem was when I did that, if it was a black hole, it was easy to, when something was melted, it was gone. Here I had to figure out, if it melts it, well, where does the substance go? It still has to be there someplace. So I had a kind of a hokey explanation for that. But this also enabled me to do a story. I love stories about trips to the center of the earth. When I was a little kid, I used to love the Jules Verne Journey to the Center of the Earth book and the classic comic and the movie, and I was just a big fan of caves. So I wanted to do a story about a trip to the center of the earth. But I knew that you can't really do that. Even if there were caves that went to the center of the earth, you couldn't go down into one of those caves because the air pressure from the surface of the earth would squash you into, atoms. So just using this idea that the universal solvent was sucking all the air out of the caves, and so that the air pressure wouldn't crush them. But just things like that. I just try to put a different twist on it, so it seems more interesting.
I just love this scene. This is my favorite scene where Scrooge just happily walks through.
Yeah, he's painted
Donald's
the solvent
door
on the top of an umbrella, so he can just poke it through.
But he seems so happy about that. He just destroyed his door, and he's really, really excited about doing that. That's really Scrooge all over.
He doesn't pay any attention to how Donald doesn't quite understand what he's doing with that umbrella.
But what I like about these stories is that, like you say, you start with a plausible scientific fact, and then you just run wild with it.
Yeah, that's part of I guess writing these kind of comics. You have a basic idea, and then you think of all the different possible ways that could go, and that's how you build the humor into it. That's how Barks would do the stories about Donald Duck as a glass blower or a window cleaner or something. You just think of all the different possible gags there could be there, and then that's how you build the story around that. So that's the same way I do this. I think of all the strange things that could happen to him, and I try to figure out a plot that would involve all of those jokes.
Yeah, but you still really try to explain everything so that it seems scientifically plausible.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it is, but it seems plausible.
No, but I don't want a reader to be seeing this, and I try to think of the questions the reader might have, and so I have to build the explanation into the story somehow. And when I do the books you were showing, it's very nice. I enjoy writing a text about creating the story, and then I can admit to the places, and I say, well, of course this doesn't work, and this part doesn't work, but I tried, and it's fun to explain to the readers, my process, and because as a fan, I always wanted to know something about how the cartoonist would write the story, and I got an opportunity to explain that to him.
Yeah.
That's the same way the story was when I did it. That's something I can mention. I first did this story in 1959 in a little booklet. I was only 8 years old. Yeah, and it was the same basic story. They go down a shaft that goes straight to the center of the earth. But when I was 8 years old, I didn't try to explain where the shaft came from. It came from the movie. Actually, I just seen the 1959 movie where they come up from the center of the earth in a volcano. So that I just assumed, well, there's shafts going straight to the center of the earth all over the place. So I did a story where my characters, they climbed down the shaft, which would have taken 10 years. So on this one, they would straight down. But I'm still just trying to do a different version of a story that I did in 1959, and then I did it again for comic fanzines about 1975. And then that was about 17. That was about the same length of time later. Then I did it for the. I did it in 1965 too. I forgot when I was doing research for the book. I discovered in my old comic book boxes of old comic books that I did it in 1959. I did another version in 1965. I did one in 1975, and then this about 1995. Panel in the upper left, that's just a demonstration of my anal retentiveness. I just love seeing things like that. So I do that for the other members of the other part of the readership who's anal like I am, and they enjoy seeing diagrams and maps. And
but what kind of reactions do you get to that? Because that's not normal in a Disney comic.
I don't know. I get a reaction kind of like that, I guess. No, I don't know. The reaction I'd get was probably from the editors. They wouldn't want to use that panel, but I'd say, well, I have to have some sort of explanation so the readers can visually see, what the characters are doing. So, but again, that's just something a nerdy thing that I would like to see in a comic. So I'd put it in there.
Well, I would too. That's why I like these stories, and that's why this is one of my favorites.
But you notice they're all like they're going to outer space instead of in a cave. But that's like I said, I had to come up with a reason where all the air was sucked out of this vertical shaft. Otherwise, they couldn't go down in it. It would be worse than going down in a submarine down 7 miles. These guys were going down, 8,000 miles. And so I had to remove all of the air. Otherwise, it couldn't be done.
That's it. Jacob? I love this also when you have the shafts on both sides of the page. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's not as easy as it looks because I do those pages in 2 pieces. because they want the original so large that I wouldn't be able to reach the top of the page from the drawing board. So that's actually 2 pieces of paper. I guess I see a crease in the screen that's exactly where the 2 pieces. You see that? I don't know if they can see it from out there, but strangely enough, that's right where the seam is. So I had to match the 2 pieces of paper up to get the shaft going all the way up to one side. But
I love this because it really gives you a feel. It's very cinematic.
Well,
you get a feel for them really falling, and it's beautiful. But how much do you feel that all these need to explain things? Does that come in the way of your stories?
Oh, you should.
Does that enhance your stories? Or?
It enhances when they're reprinted in the special editions, but the story, shouldn't need to be explained that much in the comic books. If it needs that, then it's a failure. But I like to explain just the little details. But yeah, they should be able to understand it completely without those explanations.
By the way, how's your eyesight these days? Can you see this? How's that work?
Oh yeah, my eyesight for seeing in the distance is fine now.
Yeah.
That's a long story to get into. You know, I just well, let's see. To back up, it's one of the reasons I had to finally quit was I had a detached retina in my left eye. My eyesight has been very poor ever since birth. I was congenital myopia. So I no longer do, but I used to have very thick glasses. And because of the myopia in 2008, finally my left eye fell apart. The retina fell off the back of it. We talked about that very shortly after it happened. And I won't go into recovery from retinal surgery, but it's really miserable. But you know, like I say, people have gotten used to much worse things than this. So I feel lucky.
I think we right now reached the point when everyone is sort of expecting you to draw something. I'm sorry to ask you about that. When
that's more interesting than this
your
talk
bad
about
eyesight. But
that's just boring. And
since we're talking about school, I thought we'll introduce you as Professor Rosa here and ask you to do the lecture how not to draw Donald Duck.
Yeah, that's me and Fredrik have done this a number of times. Frequently, when I'm at a show, they say, "Would you stand up at the easel and show us how you draw Donald Duck?" And I say, "Well, you know, I draw Donald Duck about this large, and I do it sitting down at a desk. So I can get up there and draw something for you, but it has nothing to do with the way I draw Donald Duck." But I think it was working with you one time. I just hit on the idea, because I never had any training in this stuff, I don't know how I'm supposed to draw properly. I draw things like an engineer would draw it, because that's the only training I have is in mechanical drawing. And I have actually always drawn Donald Duck like an engineer, especially Uncle Scrooge. So we started doing the lecture on how not to draw Donald Duck. Let's see, did I finally find one of these had a round tip on it.
It did, yeah.
Not anymore, it doesn't.
Hang on.
Did I put it in my pocket? Well, I got my blue one.
Oh, I'll go for it.
But as far as, so this is up there on the screen, huh? Drawing Uncle Scrooge, I always know, I do this with templates. Is everything on the screen?
Yep.
A template is an engineering tool. It's a plastic sheet, and it has holes cut in it of different sizes. Our other sheets have ovals, or they're called ellipses of different sizes. And there's like that might be a 30-degree ellipse, and then there's 50-degree ellipses, and then 10-degree ellipses, and so these are plastic sheets that engineers use and architects, and they use their mechanical art pen to make an exact size oval or circle. They've also got, you may have seen things that they call French curves that look kind of like this, and this is for making very smooth curls. And so anyway, the first thing I do to draw Uncle Scrooge was I do, the model sheets say he's 3.5 heads tall, so I'd use well, I do about 3.5 heads like that. Then I'd have to draw his beak freehand, but then I knew his glasses. When I did his glasses, if his head was turned sideways, that would be a 50-degree ellipse. and I'd get the plastic sheet out, and I'd do that. I knew his eye would be, was about a 30-degree ellipse. So every single time, especially on the close-ups, that's how I draw his eye. I wouldn't do it freehand. I do it with mechanical art engineering tools. I knew when I did his hat, the top of his hat was a 20-degree ellipse. And now I'd repeat that on the band there. That's also a 20-degree ellipse. When I do his whiskers, I do them freehand, but first with a pencil, I do a circle, a 100-degree, or what would that be? I'd lay it out as a circle, and then I'd match the ends of his whiskers right to the end of that circle. Even doing his collar button, that might be a 50-degree ellipse. Every part of him was what were the other? Yeah, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. When I do Huey, Dewey, and Louie, their eyes were 30-degree ellipses. The pupils were maybe 20-degree ellipses. Then I'd do whatever size. This might have been a 3.5-inch circle, and then I'd make their hat would have to sit on that circle. So maybe that was a 2.5-inch circle. But this is how not to draw Donald Duck. I was actually laying it out like a truss diagram that I do in college. Because I was taught that if it wasn't done this way mechanically, I was used to learning how to design bridges, and if the bridge wasn't designed right, it would collapse and thousands of people would die. So I had to make sure this was all designed just perfectly. Oh, even as I look at this, I think it's even crazier than you think. When I do an eye, if his head was tipped sideways, I draw this part of the eye with a 20-degree ellipse, and then this part with a 30-degree ellipse, because it's supposed to be rounder on one side than the other. I'd actually do this, and of course the eye would be a 30-degree ellipse. And that's definitely how not to draw Scrooge McDuck. His belt would be about a 20-degree ellipse. Oh, his spat buttons, those might be 50-degree ellipses on his... But everything in each panel was... and I did... I got lots of paper.
Go for it.
In the money bin, then those ellipses, they'd really come into play. If I had Scrooge sitting there, that's about as well as I can draw anymore. But he's sitting there tossing the money up in the air. On a pile of coins, I'd draw, especially on a close-up, I'd draw every coin with an individual ellipse. Just, I don't know, because I wanted the fans to see I was working really hard to get this just right. But each coin would be a different size, and each one would be like a 50 degrees and 40 degrees. But I draw every coin, at least on the hill that was the mound of coins close to the reader, with all of these different ellipse sheets. And that looks really bad, I think. It would look better if they were done like the art directors would want me to do. They do it freehand, so it doesn't look as stiff. Obviously, when I draw like an engineer, the characters look stiff. But that's the only way I knew how. They couldn't teach me to do it any other way because I'd never been taught. So they just said, well, people seem to like it, so let him do it his way, but don't let anybody else start this kind of stuff.
I think the fact that you got what I think is the biggest crowd we've had this year on the comic stage says that people don't agree with your poor assessment of your art.
Well, it's just good that not all the comics are done this way. It's fun if there's one of them that look this strange, but I think it'd be these comics wouldn't be as popular all across Europe if they were done by an engineer like this.
Well, might be. I think we're actually getting close to quitting here. So, is there maybe a question from the audience?
Yeah. No?
Hang on. Let's see. We'll see if we can get you a microphone here. Hang on.
Yeah, I wonder, you probably got similar questions before, but I would like to know your single piece of work that you're most happy with. Not the whole series, not the whole comic book, but the single one thing, a phrase, a specific picture or a character that you created yourself?
I think I could hear most of that. He wants to know what. I usually didn't like what I did. It's usually even the stories like the Guardians of the Lost Library that you seem to like. When I finish that story, you know, when I work on a story, I work on it for like 3 or 4 months. So by the time I'm done, I'm sure the whole thing's a dreadful mistake because I'm so sick and tired of that story. But that story in particular, I thought was definitely a mistake because the ducks just went from one place to another, and it just was there was no action or explosions or anything. And but people really like that story. I've had people say it was their favorite of my stories. Some other people say it's their favorite Donald Duck story. Other people have said it's their favorite comic book story ever, which is kind of an extreme. That's one thing I did learn in this business. Every single story I did, one person would say it was their favorite story of all time, another person would say it was the worst story they'd ever read, and everybody else was evenly spaced in between. And that's when I learned there's no way to try to please people. I just have to do the comics the way I want and hope somebody out there likes them. But so I could never judge my stories at all. I just try the best I could, and I'd have to look at them like a year later and see if I liked them, which would be difficult because they're always printed in languages I couldn't read. But my favorite ones, you seem to think that I would say The Life of Scrooge, and if that's all one long story, I enjoyed that one the most. But after that, if I had been able to still see and continue doing this, and if I could have my way, I told people that I would love to have gone on just doing 2 types of stories. I would have loved telling stories of Scrooge and the Klondike with Glittering Goldie, and then alternating that with Scrooge maybe 10 or 15 years later with Teddy Roosevelt as troubleshooters going around the world and righting wrongs and having adventures. But my very favorite story of my own, I really like that Dream of a Lifetime story that everybody thinks they made the Inception movie out of. That was a fun story. But a guy was telling me yesterday in line that he liked the story called A Letter from Home, and he said, but he could also tell there was some quality in that story. He thought I was wrapping up my career, that I was going to quit pretty soon. And I said, well, you're very perceptive, because you're right. That was before I had eye trouble. I was really too frustrated with this whole system that I knew, I also, like he could tell, I knew I was going to, I didn't want to quit, but I just couldn't go on it any longer. And he seemed to sense that. But also about 2 stories later, I did a story called The Prisoner of White Agony Creek, where it was a Yukon story with Glittering Goldie, and it was a subject that I'd put off doing for many years, a story of based on another Bark sequel, and when I finished, I sort of felt like, well, I don't really have anything else to say about this character. That's anything else I do from now on would be sort of be repetition, and that was one of my favorite. My last story was might have been my favorite one. I guess that's a nice way to end. I remember it went on about a year after that. I just couldn't get myself to do another story as much as I wanted to, and I started hearing people saying, you know, oh, his next story, it's going to be sensational because he's taking a year to do it. And I'm saying, well, that's scary, because I don't think I could do a story as good, much less even better than anything I'd ever done. And that's one reason why I always thought that the eye problem was a blessing in disguise, because I just couldn't decide what to do. I didn't see how I could go on in the system any longer, and that eye problem was like my body saying, oh, you can't make up your mind? Try this. And the back fell off my eye.
I think that everyone here is sad that you're not doing any more comics, but that's the way life is.
Yeah, I'm not sad I'm not doing them, but because I never liked drawing. Drawing was, I see real cartoonists who actually enjoy drawing. To me it was tedious, and I didn't think I did it very good, but it was the only way I could tell the story. So I sure don't miss drawing. I feel bad that people want me to go on. I miss that, but that's why I can still do nice big sketches for them, and I like talking to them at shows like this and on tours. But yeah, my favorite stories were usually the ones that had Glittering Goldie in them, and or Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, considering that one question you answered in 10 minutes. I'm sorry, but
And
we're
that's
not,
why
we're not
I
going to have
answer
time for
questions.
another question. So, thank you very much, and give a big hand to Mr. Rosa.
Wow, okay.